So, hello everyone from sunny Hastings in England. This is going to be a super interesting panel. The subject is alien. And I wanted to do this subject because obviously it's getting a lot of press at the moment with all these stories of disclosure. But also because the UFO, the UAP, the alien concept in culture right now is taking on this interesting dimension of consciousness and interactions between human consciousness and some sort of other consciousness. So we've got so many different people from so many different fields in this panel. I thought this was like a really nice kind of 101 of everything and anything to do with aliens that's happening right now. Hopefully we're going to have Chris Bledsoe join us, who is very well known for filming, recording and experiencing orbs, which is often the form these experiences or this phenomena takes and gets talked about quite a lot. We also have Dallas Campbell with us, who is an author and a TV presenter and a science communicator, and talks to scientists a lot about space travel, about space weather, and all sorts of interesting phenomena. And I know he's worked with SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial, what's the I bit again? Independence, intelligence. And also he was just mentioning that he's going with the Etheria Society to go UFO spotting as well soon as well. So I thought that was something we can talk about. And then I'm joined here by my friend Pascal Michael, who has just got back from Contact in the Desert. So perhaps we could start off with a little bit about Contact in the Desert, which you have just come back from.
Yeah, I mean, you've asked me to kind of give a whole synopsis of the whole scene, the whole alien quote unquote scene at the moment, which I think will be super hard to do, but because it is so multi-variegated and shifting, and but there was so much that was spoken about. So Tom was there speaking, so he'll have certainly something to say about what he was talking about, which to me is a very kind of holistic, broad, sweeping, and come to kind of model of all this. I can talk to some of the things that I saw and loved. We had like Josh Cutchin, he was talking about fourth wall phantoms, kind of more folkloric ideas of how these entities can come into our space in a sense of kind of theophany, or the relationship between this phenomenon, the abduction phenomenon, and death and dying and near-death experiences, which is something I'm especially interested in. We had Michael Phillips from Third Eye Drops, and he was talking about looking at this whole thing from an ancient Greek Neoplatonic perspective, and how that lens is extremely helpful. And other kind of theurgical magical traditions. What else? There was interesting physicists talking about these phenomena related to the orbs and things being regarding ball lightning and plasma and things like that. So hopefully we can get into that maybe. I was talking about support necessary for these kinds of experiences. So it's not really about the nature of these things and the ontology, but actually how so often these experiences can be born of trauma, they can create trauma, and the difference between post-traumatic stress and growth, and the support that's necessary, how we can support them. And then another one about psychedelics and how psychedelics do often occasion these kinds of encounters with beings which are sometimes referred to as alien-like, etc. So yeah, there was a lot there. And yeah, and some of these people, Morgan I met there, Anthony I met last year at Contact. So sure, the whole idea of contact can come through.
Great, thank you. Susan, I wonder if we could start with you, because you're the other person on the panel that I know well, and I know that you write a lot and talk a lot about these kind of modern experiences, and also you've got a sciencey partner who writes papers about the scientific analysis of this kind of phenomena.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me okay? It's a new, okay, perfect. Hi, I'm Susan. I'd like to start off by coming right out and saying I'm an experiencer. And that is what brought me towards this research into UFOs. My research interests tend to be more towards the humanities. I'm very interested in social sci and how the UFO impacts society as well as on an individual basis. My husband is an astrophysicist. He's Massimo Teodoranyi, and he also he has come forward as well as a person who has had their own personal experiences, as well as he worked for SETI for a number of years and he's written on the subject. We've both done field research together, most recently in Hessdalen, Norway, where there is a continuous phenomena that has been experienced at least since 1980. J. Allen Hynek, Dr. Hynek, who's famous in the UFO circles, actually went out there and witnessed the phenomena firsthand. It is an interesting, very unique and interesting place to go to see this kind of these orb phenomena. For me, the subject, it's so vast. If you asked me 20 years ago, do I believe that these are spaceships with aliens from other planets visiting us? I would have probably said, yeah, I was all on board with that. However, over the last 2 decades, I've really evolved in my thinking and as well with the more experiences I've had directly with UFOs. That, I mean, if it is alien, I think it's a lot more exotic than is the standard idea that we have that narrative of aliens visiting from other planets. I think the reason I really was into that before when I was much younger was because it was something that I desired. I grew up with Star Wars. I grew up with Star Trek, Doctor Who. Of course, I want like a universe populated with all sorts of different alien beings that, we can interact with and we can learn from and have adventures with. But I do feel now, and I believe my husband as well, despite the fact he's a physical scientist and he's never going to really write off that idea of aliens from other planets. And I do believe there is life elsewhere. But what we're experiencing here as UFOs, I think we both have come to the idea that it's more of a consciousness issue, that if it is another, it is something that we are creating or co-creating with. This can be evidence like with different cultures. Like pop culture tends to be focused on America and Western culture. But when you start looking at different cultures, if you start looking at Asia, Africa, how other people other than Western culture, including Russia in the time of Soviet Union, how they were experiencing this phenomena was very different. And I'm sure that goes back to time, in antiquity. Like, Jacques Vallée was looking at cases going back to ancient Greek, or the fairy lore, and that where people were probably having real experiences with the Tunuath Danan. And there seems to be this thread of a pattern of that is holding on to this experience, and it changes depending upon individual culture, society. And that's why I'm thinking even now, a lot of the kind of experiences that were being reported popularly in the 1950s and 1960s, and that they're just not happening the same way, because as societies are evolving and we're evolving, our connection with that phenomena is as well. And that includes with me personally. I have had numerous UFO experiences. When I tried to reject them for a while, I tried to seek solace in skeptical communities, um, you know, because they are so shocking. Okay, they're not easy to live with, and they're certainly not easy to talk about. But the more I tried to suppress that, the more I was having experiences. And when I started to integrate my psyche, my spiritual life, I'm a practicing pagan. Uh, when I was able to integrate that all together, I found myself as a much more whole person. I wrote a book called Cosmic Witch, in which I talk about um, the changes that were enacted within me because of the UFO phenomena, the way I view the world as an animist, my feelings towards nature, which is only deepening stronger and stronger through the UFO phenomena, which then later in my research, I realized contactees, even in the 50s, were talking about, how we have to preserve our planet, how we have to be careful with this nuclear energy and all these things. It's really interwoven itself within me, who I am, my spirituality. And now within my research, I'm more interested in people's experiences, how it's changed them, and supporting other people who are experiencers so that they can feel comfortable in coming forward and not having to worry about stigma that comes along with being open and saying, hey, I've had these very highly strange experiences that seem to be outside of the consensus reality that we day to day live in. Because I do feel that if we don't allow that within people, they tend to deconstruct. And I've seen that in the UFO community where people lose their homes, they lose their jobs, they lose their family life because it's when you are confronted with this, it is so shocking that it's very difficult to try and cope with. And so that's where I'm at with it now. It's such a big, vast thing. So thank you. I don't want to take up too much time. I want to hear from everyone else too. So
Absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much, Susan.
thank you.
I wonder if you wouldn't mind sharing, because I think it's really valuable to at least a bit of an experience that you had, if you don't mind. No problems if you don't want to.
I can. I mean, I have written about it, and I do have a Substack where I've shared a lot. In the when we were we talked about imaginary. I think it was imaginal that we were talking about in the first. Forget which one it was. Entity. And I talked about having like imaginary friends as a child. I had a number of experiences. I really wasn't that putting the like we tend to put things into categories. So as a child, I felt I was haunted by ghosts. I knew that something very weird was going on with me, and I felt very isolated. Later on, as a teenager and as a young adult, I tried to write these things off as, oh, I was a very imaginative, creative child. But then at age 23, I had a very shocking UFO encounter with my brother-in-law, and it involved a nuclear power plant in Ontario, Canada, in the banks of Lake Ontario. It's called the Pickering Power Plant. And we were both there. We were both adults, we completely sober, that there was no way we could write this off. And that kind of pulled me in. And at the time, there was no internet. At least it was not readily available. So I went to the library and I found a book by Dr. Hynek in QFOS, and I wrote him a physical letter. And it came back. It was returned to me. It was no longer, the address was no longer valid. In fact, at that point, Dr. Hynek had already passed away. So I kind of had to put that aside for a number of years. Then I got involved in the UFO community. I got involved in some boots on the ground kind of investigations of UFOs. And I was involved in spook light, where the main spook lights turned out to be a car headlight. Okay. So there was that debunking aspect. And then at that point, I started to really question my own experiences. And because I got involved with some skepticals, um, I started to question that. And then in 2001, I was out with a friend. We were walking along again the banks of Lake Ontario near the same power plant when a huge diamond-shaped craft, I can only call it that. It looked like it was something solid and metallic at the time, appeared to us. It was quite shocking. It was at very close range. I felt like if I could pick up a rock and throw it at this thing, I would have expected to hit it and hear a metallic clank. And with my girlfriend being there with me at the time, I was just so blown away. I realized, no, there's something to this, and I can't be any more skeptical about it, at least at the fact that something has been happening. And then after that, I got involved more with the UFO community and going out and meeting people, that have had these experiences documenting their cases. Often I found people would put in a report online that would be like, oh, I saw this light in the sky and blah, blah, blah. And I would go and meet with people in person because when I met with them in person, that's when all the high strangeness would come out. That's when people would feel comfortable and they'd say, oh, yeah, well, I had this experience, but I also, a few days later, I noticed all this weird poltergeist-like stuff happening in my home or other things that might be considered highly strange or high strangeness. And so that kind of got me along into where I began experimenting directly with the phenomena based on some parapsychological techniques. This I could go on forever, so I don't want to take up too much time. But basically, I started doing more direct experimentation with the phenomena itself, and I can tell you that with the CE5 protocols, as set forth by Dr. Greer, they do work. If you go out to a place where people are reporting UFOs, and you simply go out there enough times, and if you just open up your mind or your heart to it, and you say, please show yourself to me, they do. They will. I don't know why exactly, but they do respond. You can literally interact with these beings, let's call them that, or consciousness, the alien other. So it took me a long time to get to that process, but that's where I'm at. And I still can't tell you 100% what they are. It's just they are, and they are experienced all over the world by every type of person, probably much more than we actually know, because people are afraid to come forward.
Well, this I think maybe not might nicely segue into the idea of, yes, I know we're all fascinated about the kind of the metaphysical aspect of it, but the implications for like well-being, support, the therapeutic aspects. And so maybe because there are at least a couple of people that I think could speak really nicely to that, especially maybe with Anthony, because you mentioned, Susan, about kind of opening yourself up to these things, inducing these kinds of things. So Anthony, maybe do you think at this point might you be comfortable to speak a little bit to these kind of, your means of approaching, contact, and because I understand that you've had some challenging experiences around that, so I'd be really interested to hear from you in terms of your understanding of the risk involved, but also, yeah, being discernment necessary in that, but also what can still come of the experience, the fruits of it, and your integration of it and stuff.
Sure. Thanks, Pascal. Um, yeah, so I pretty much thank you, Susan. That was amazing. And to follow that up is going to be really hard. I pretty much agree with almost everything, basically everything Susan said. And I would add that in my opinion and my research and background, that there is this very real physical element to this that we in the UFO community call the nuts and bolts, like in Susan's own experience, and there is this governmental element to this, and the secrecy and the cover-ups, and um, when Susan mentioned like the potential of us co-creating reality with this apparent other, I do think that is very literal when we say that in some of these cases. And I don't think ontologically we really are prepared to understand or grok what that actually means and how it plays out. But yeah, so in terms of my own experiences, um, I do agree there is this extreme initiatory element to these experiences. I personally went looking for this, kind of in a search for meaning in my own life during COVID. I think a lot of people had what we would call "quote unquote" awakenings during that period, and I was one of them. And as I went looking for it, I created this. I would call it like a contact protocol for myself. It's not prescriptive. It was suited for, I think, best suited for me and where I was in life, and kind of my more logical left brain type way of viewing the world, and analytical way of viewing the world. So yeah, I created this protocol. It does involve psilocybin mushrooms, in addition with some breathwork techniques, some meditative techniques through the Monroe Institute's Gateway program, some sensory deprivation things, fasting, like a whole load of things that I put together through my research, as well as like shamanic drumming music. So I pulled from all these different cultures and traditions, modern and otherwise. And I think because of the way that I approached it, the first time I did this, and back in 2023, I had the most amazing, benevolent, life-changing experience of my life on this protocol. The first time I tried it, it completely cracked me open. There was an apparent other being that appeared completely visually in my mind's eye, and I have pretty bad aphantasia normally. I can't really visualize, but I mean, this was more real than you all are here. And I mean, it took on, I guess, what would be considered like an archetypal form with a kind of a hawk headed man. Um, and there was telepathic communication. There was, I've talked about this on other episodes of our podcast, Fire in the Cosmos with my co host Sinead here. So I won't get too much into that, but that I repeated that protocol subsequently every few months or so. And I think for me, I view the use of psilocybin in my case to complement the other modalities I use as kind of important for me, both because of my aphantasia. I also have these like this chronic form of rheumatism that really prevents me from really being comfortable somatically. So I feel like in order to enter some of these states, you really need to be fully comfortable in your physical body. So the psilocybin helps with some of those things for me, as well as the visualization, and also getting out of my logical thinking brain. So yeah, I pursue it very intentionally, and I did that several times since then. And as it went on, it really did become this very initiatory type of, I would call it like a training program, like a metaphysical training program that I feel like I've been going through. That's really caused me um, to grow in ways that required pushing me to my ontological, like ontological brink in different ways, and really trying to understand deeper parts of myself, my shadow, my psyche, my shame, my guilt, my fears, everything that I need to work through to really be in a more relational way with reality around me and with others around me. Um, and that has continued. And the way it's manifested in some of these experiences on this protocol has involved other entities, seemingly other entities. Some have been darker in nature. Some have, uh, there's this blending between myself and the other that happens between the objective and the subjective, where it seems like these things tend to feed on your own shadow, and it can kind of feed into the experience. Um, and it almost seems like there's a way to, I do believe there's a way to work through that with yourself and change the nature of these experiences and the nature of the quote unquote other, and how they relate with you. So, yeah, I mean, I've talked with Pascal about this more recently in a microphenomenology interview, so I won't get too deep into that. But I mean, this stuff really does require uh, a process to be able to work through what you're experiencing, and it's not easy to do alone. I probably would have been completely derailed in my life had it not been for the amazing friends and community that I've built and had around me in these circles. And it's not always people who think like me. I have people around me with different ideas of the phenomenon and the other, and from different backgrounds, some who are in psychology and neuroscience, and some who are not, and getting all their takes and really talking through these experiences with them, and even with my friends like Sinead here, and having someone to really mirror off of you, that really is important in the integration process. And that's really because we don't have the societal and systemic structures in place as Susan was hinting at, to really help experiencers and help us in this period that I believe calls for an ontological shift. So that's essentially my take.
Thank you, Anthony. Yeah, your points there, and also coming back to some of Susan's points about animism and having a framework. And I think this is what often leads to that fragmentation of self, where you do not have a structure or a framework that can make sense of what you've experienced is so important. But, you know, one thing I'm really interested in, and one thing that the panels has kind of touched upon a lot, is the imagination, and the, you know, our idea about the world. And especially when we did our science panel, we were talking about how science can feel very unsatisfactory sometimes, even though it's the kind of dominant way we try to understand the world, that actually we're learning more and more the world is this holistic system, the cosmos is this holistic system. And if you view the cosmos as living, which a lot of ancient people obviously did, you can start to make sense of this phenomena, and you can see that kind of divinity running through everything, because everything is ultimately connected. And I think, you know, when babies are first born, they are cultured from the outset to see the world in a certain way, and we have to do that, otherwise we'd probably be overwhelmed by spinning on a planet in space. We'd be sick, or like we couldn't cope with the amount of information. So we do try to make sense of things, and how we make sense of things is so much a result of the things we've been taught, the stories we've been told. Dallas was saying earlier that we are storied beings. You know, our whole life is a series of stories. And I think with the imagination, it's almost to me like the whole of reality is imagination, and becoming sensible is about becoming eloquent with your imagination and finding your place in space and time. And I guess culture has become so fragmented that we are going down these different rabbit holes and perceiving these things in different ways. And the internet facilitates that, people seeing the world in completely different ways, sharing and arguing about how they see the world. And that is something that can never be reconciled. Like, we're never going to all agree on what we've seen. So we have to have perhaps some overarching appreciation for the malleable, flexible, fluid nature of reality, because that is quite scientific, I think. So there were a few things I wanted to bring up, which is this idea of animism and the whole cosmos being living. We know that ancient cultures perceived the stars and the sun as living entities, and they recognized that plants and animals have a spirit and have a language. Also, the relationship between trauma, a couple of you have brought that up, and it does seem to be kind of well established in the community of UAP experiences nowadays, that often people that have experienced a lot of trauma are more kind of primed to have these kinds of encounters. And I wonder about that and how that relates perhaps to something like disassociation and fragmentation and projection. You know, if a child experiences something very traumatic, like a bit of its personality kind of can go off at a different angle. And I think, you know, so much of science these days is about one human being being this individual alone in the world in this hostile environment, when actually it would be more humane and more realistic to consider ourselves as part of this living organism of Earth, which I think science is actually starting to understand now. And the other thing is, why would aliens care about any single human being's individual's feelings, or even their worst experiences ever? That I'm really interested in that. And I guess that's what leads me more to see this as some kind of psychic phenomena. I think Susan mentioned poltergeist activity, and poltergeist activity, when it's been studies, has often been seen to be psychic energy from angry teenagers and things like this. So I wonder about the psychic and the conscious dimensions of it. And yeah, I think that was about it for me. Anyone? I think Dallas, maybe you could talk about the history of UAP UFO encounters, and you were mentioning the Etheria Society earlier.
Hi everyone, I'm Dallas. I've got a barking dog outside. My dog's going crazy. Sorry, what was the question?
Maybe your dog has seen a UFO.
Maybe my dog has seen the UFO. It's interesting that you sort of call them UAPs now. I always quite enjoy the change from I suppose in the late 1940s they were known as flying saucers, the famous Kenneth Arnold sighting, and then in order to sound more sciencey and more credible, they changed it to UFOs. And then of course UFOs became a little bit of a, not a joke, but became part of, you know, part of our sort of collective popular culture. And then now they've been called UAPs to make them sound really official and really. So yeah, I suppose I'm interested in it from a sort of historical point of view, like why people believe certain things. There certainly seems to be several sort of groups. There's the more supernatural element, I suppose, and a more spiritual side of Susan and other eloquently put forward. And then someone else mentioned this idea of nuts and bolts. There's the kind of nuts and bolts flying saucers. The government is hiding flying saucers and what have you. I'm my own interest in, I make science films, is, you know, is are we alone in the universe? Is there life out there? Which I fundamentally believe there is. I think it would be a ridiculous thing I don't think anyone would suggest there isn't life out there. Do I believe that life has visited Earth and the governments are hiding that? I think that's a big no for me. Out of interest, I'm one of the few journalists that's actually filmed inside Area 51. so 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 that's quite interesting, but it's a subject I've been interested. So I've made films about SETI. I made films with Frank Drake and Jill Tarter, who are the founders of SETI back in the early 1970s. And I've made films about exoplanets and science's search for life, looking at a kind of methodical ways that we might detect life on other planets using things like biosignatures on things like the Hubble Space Telescope, the James Webb Space Telescope, and actually what can we actually do to answer that question? Because I do believe it is probably the most important, the most fundamental question in science. Wherever you stand on UFOs, are we alone in the universe, is pretty fundamental, I think. Every so often we get quite excited results. I remember in the mid 90s, Bill Clinton standing in the Rose Garden saying, "Oh, look, we found a meteorite. We think it's got a bit of fossilized worm from Mars on it," and it turns out it wasn't. And every so often we get these kind of nearly, or perhaps this is it. A couple of years ago, we thought we'd found life in the upper clouds of Venus, which was quite interesting. We've got a phosphine signature, which we think is a biomarker, and that's still out there. We still think that's very possible. Sarah Seeger, who's a exoplanetary scientist, they're developing a probe that's actually going to land through the clouds of Venus and actually take measurements, so we might get an answer. I think we'll get an answer in my lifetime, and I'm pretty old, but I think in the next 10 years or so we will find life of some kind within our solar system, whether that's one of the Jovian moons or whether that's deep under the Martian surface or in the clouds of Venus. I think it's pretty likely, and it'll be interesting to see how people react to that. How will things change? Because if we find, you know, at the moment we have one data point of life, which is Earth. If we find another point of life somewhere in our solar system, then we can safely assume that life is common everywhere else in the galaxy. The problem have aliens visited us? To me, it's given the scales of the universe and the time that it takes to get anywhere. I think for me personally, it's probably more likely that these are ideas that are kind of, as Carl Jung pointed out in his book on flying saucers, is very much a form of modern folklore. Not that that's to belittle it in any way, because modern folklores are important. All folklore is important. They are a way that human beings organize uncertainty. We make stories, we tell stories, and that's from, as somebody said, ancient times through to the latest Steven Spielberg film. We love stories, we love narratives. It's how we make sense of stuff. So it's all good. I guess I'm more interested in, is it real in inverted commas? I don't take magic mushrooms. I'm not part of that kind of world, so I don't really have anything to say about that. But I am interested in it as a question. And I never use the word ontological, which I notice people use a lot. I don't think I know what ontological means. What does ontological mean? It's everyone's favorite word.
Ontology. Well,
Means
technically,
what?
the study of being and reality.
Oh, okay.
The nature of reality.
Yeah.
But,
yeah. I mean, the thing is about science, people always have a go, oh, science is bad, science is this. Science lets us make Zoom calls. That's what science gives you. Science keeps airplanes up in the air and cars on the road and that kind of stuff. So it's not. I think it's disingenuous to give science such a hard time all the time. I mean, science just makes the point of science is that things have to be falsifiable, and the problem is with flying saucer or UFO or UAP, whatever you want to call them, ideas, is that they're unfalsifiable. There's nothing that I could say or that could disprove that UFOs have visited Earth or the government is hiding them. But I think people who do believe that governments are hiding UFOs have a much higher regard for governments than I do. The idea that governments could hide such revelatory things for so long, I think, is pretty unlikely. But I may be wrong. But and I see various sort of scientists kind of jumping on the UFO bandwagon, the Avi Loebs of this world, cashing in on that idea, because humans like UFO. I like UFO stories. I love UFO stories. That's why I was filming in Area 51, because I'm interested in that kind of world. But I'm also interested in is it true? I am interested in that because I actually think science's search for life beyond Earth is just as magical and is just as extraordinary and it's just as beautiful as anything you might take with magic mushrooms.
Well, do you mind if I just? I mean, there's so much that you can take out of what you just said, Dallas, and thank you so much. I'd especially like to ask you about you being in Area 51, and Annie Jacobsen has wrote a fascinating book about that, and it's really coming to conclusions that there's nothing really exotic in a way that's extraterrestrial or anything. The last thing you said there about what speaks the kind of disenchantment of everything, really, and actually how we can refocus on this world.
Well, it's this idea. What annoys me is this idea that somehow science ruins the magic, and it just doesn't. This idea that somehow unweaving the rainbow and understanding a little bit about how rainbows work somehow destroys the magic of a rainbow, and it just doesn't. There's the famous Sagan, not Sagan, the famous Richard Feynman. I have a friend who's an artist, and he'll hold up a flower and say, "Look how beautiful it is." And you scientists, you take it all apart, it becomes a dull thing. And I think he's kind of nutty, and I agree. It's kind of nutty to suggest that somehow trying to understand, get knowledge about things is somehow to take away the magic of it.
I don't know. Sometimes isn't it like watching the DVD extras, because that ruins the film?
Maybe. I like watching the DVD
you're
extras.
One of the DVD extra people that you're supposed to just suspend your disbelief and believe in the world. And when you watch the DVD extras, you see David Bowie smoking a fag. It's boring.
But it's funny actually, because in the David Attenborough the recent sort of David Attenborough documentaries, they always have a bit at the end now of the kind of making of that documentary, and that's really to fill in the gaps where adverts and various networks would be. So they have this extra sort of 10 minutes, and that's how they film it. And it's actually become the most popular bit of the documentary because I think people like to know how these things are made. I'd love there to be a flying saucer, and the fact that I don't believe in UAPs, UFOs, whatever you want to call them. I know exactly what would change my mind. And I find myself having conversations with people, particularly in the more kind of conspiratorial world of the government are hiding things. And I say to them, well, what would change your mind? What could happen? Like, for example, if the government released all the information and there was nothing there, would you go, okay, there's nothing there? Or would you go, oh, no, they're still hiding things? And that seems to be what it is, because it's just an infinite regress. If you believe the government are hiding things, there's nothing that the government can say that will change your mind. And so you've got to be careful of that, because when we have strong beliefs about things, we are liable to fool ourselves. And for all science's faults, the one thing that it's really good at is acting as a corrective lens of our own bullshit. That's the point of science, to not care about things like anecdotal evidence, not to not care about it, but to actually suspend one's own beliefs, because human beings are prone to all kinds of beliefs about all kinds of things, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you actually want to get to the truth, then you've got to come up with a way of dealing with that. And the scientific method is the best way we've come up with so far.
Okay. Do you guys mind if I throw just a one-liner? I'm sorry, I'm budging in. I also saw that David was raising his hand, so I don't want to. I just want to say a really short thing that actually kind of reconciles, because I agree with a huge chunk of what you're saying, Dallas. And the best way I've heard it ever expressed was understanding the molecular constituents of chocolate doesn't ruin the taste of chocolate.
Yeah, exactly.
In fact, it can make you make better chocolate if you just understand, and then you can enjoy
Yeah.
the experience still. With just like a point in the other direction, just as short. On the other hand, for example, my work revolves around a particular triangulation of an experience that has physical components that you can say about it, but it does run into the ontological problem, which is that basically, what are we willing to agree that we're sampling from? Like, what are the things we include in our world model that we are willing to entertain that are real? Because if you can't or not willing to, it will close your even attempt of going there. You would constantly try and fold it into frames that might not be serving it. And that's a very contentious ground, of course. So, because largely I fully agree with your point about science. I'm a big fan. But there is this other thing, which is like we have to allow sometimes a little bit more to understand beyond what is currently understood. And that can it also has to be on the table. But yeah.
I think you're right. I think you make a really good point. Science isn't about getting right answers. Everything that we know in science now will be wrong in 10 years' time. That's the way science just, all science is it's not a body of knowledge. Science, it is a method. It is a method of explaining nature to the best we can based on the best evidence we've got. It is always subject to change. It is never dogmatic. People who say that science is dogmatic have no idea how science works, because they don't spend any time with scientists.
I agree with you.
And I find that really frustrating. And people always like, oh, science is this is beyond, more than science or better than science. No, you don't. There's a fundamental misunderstanding of how science works. It's not to belittle people's experience or anything like that. It's purely trying to filter out human motivated reasoning to get to the closest idea of a reality that we can. Science gives us Zoom calls. That's what science does. If we didn't have science, it would still be the 60s. It would be the Middle Ages still.
I'll give you one very simple technical area where I found it. It's not my argument, obviously, but I heard this and I said, interesting. That is where science being a little bit, not dogmatic, but it is being a little too tethered to its one modality it decided on as the fundamental one.
I don't understand what that means. I don't understand what modality means.
I will explain.
What do you mean? Okay.
So I'm sure you're familiar with David Deutsch to some degree.
Yeah, I know David Deutsch. I think he's a very, very fine. I don't know his.
Yeah. So the point that he made, I'll make it very short. In his constructor theory, is that he's essentially not just offering a new theoretical framework.
Yeah.
He's offering a new modality of observation, which is that we should not assume that spin, momentum, and all these things are fundamental, because that's one modality of looking at it. What might be true about the world is that we should be talking about what is possible and what is impossible according to what we understand about the laws of physics. And that sounds like a very slight shift, but it's an enormous one, because what that allows you to do is it allows you to ask the question, is it possible that even if things arose after some other things, like, for example, minds, if we assume they arose from matter, right? Let's say we assume this.
Yeah.
I don't belong to this camp, but that's okay. Like, let's assume this, right? So then you should still allow for the possibility, if in fact you see that what in fact is possible with minds was not possible to any degree before, to such a degree where you can all of a sudden steer the laws of physics, so to speak, through minds, right? Then all of a sudden you can allow for things that arose later to become fundamental. Like knowledge becomes a fundamental force in the universe. And this is not a poetic way of speaking about it. It's a technical way of speaking about it. And he ties it to concrete arguments with thermodynamics.
Yeah.
But
I'm familiar with it. I'm familiar.
Yeah.
I'm familiar with the weirdness and the poetry of you know,
But I don't think it's meant
of modern.
poetically, and that's the
Well,
point. Yeah.
well, it is. I say it's poetic in the sense that there is a beauty and elegance to physics because we don't understand physics. We don't. It is. It does not work in human brains to try and comprehend quantum mechanics. For example, we understand how quantum mechanics works. Quantum mechanics is fundamental to modern life. And actually trying to understand, you know, two atoms being in two places at once doesn't really compute. Um, but I think there's this idea that science knows everything, and it doesn't. So uncertainty is what science is all about. Quantifying uncertainty is what physics is all about. You know, we had a pretty good idea of classical physics thanks to Newton, and then suddenly Einstein came along and turned it on its head. So it's always like peeling onions. And good physicists, you know, my partner's a physicist, will tell you we don't know that there's you know, physics never sort of comes to an end, and that's kind of the fun. I guess that's what I mean by the poetry of physics. You know, science isn't the lesson that you did in between French and English. It is a way of exploring that filters out the human tendency to see things that aren't there. A classic example is in the search for life, and in the search for life beyond the universe is the Percival Lowell and the canals on Mars. Telescopes weren't very good, and when we were looking at planets through telescopes back in the 19th and early 20th century, we've got an atmosphere in the way. So all the images that pass through the atmosphere are fuzzy and blurry, and you can never get a really good image. And as such, brains start to see things. It's why every UAP or UFO photograph you see or video that everyone gets very excited about. Oh, the Nimitz Tic Tac photo. It's all grainy and blurry and black and white, and it's like looking at the bark of a tree. You start to see shapes. It's like the beginning of Hamlet when they look up into the clouds and go, "Methinks 'tis a camel," and then he says, "No, 'tis a weasel," because we see patterns and shapes and stories wherever we look, and that's pretty fundamental, I think, to the current UFO flight. And that's why science is good. You should read. Anyway, Percival Lowell looked at Mars, saw these stripes, saw these shapes, automatically assumed that these were canals that had been built on Mars as part of a big hydro project to save the dying planet. And suddenly Martians were born, and blah blah blah. And then of course our eyesight got better, and we got better telescopes, and we looked closer and we realized it wasn't that at all. It was just the play of light and shade on a planet. And so science is constantly updating its knowledge all the time, every day. And that's why it's so elegant and beautiful. And those who dismiss it as somehow, oh, they don't understand the esoteric nature of the world. I'm like, no, you're misunderstanding how science and astronomy works.
Then, if all science is going to be wrong in 10 years, what's the point?
Yeah. Because what's the point? because we still want to find out what keeps the whole show on the road. Because understanding. Not okay. When I say everything, if I drop an apple in 10 years' time, it's still going to fall on the table. So not everything. But what I mean is ideas come and ideas go, and we're always adding to the body of knowledge. And sometimes things will be disproved. So, for example, you know, Einstein's theories of special and general relativity are the best thing we have at explaining how gravity works. But what I'm saying is by being wrong, I'm using wrong in inverted commas, in 10 years' time, we will have a better understanding, a deeper understanding. Experiments like the Large Hadron Collider or the James Webb Telescope, when engineering projects catch up with science, suddenly we start to see further, and then new things come along, and that's really exciting. And for me personally, I can't think of anything more exciting than understanding nature and the natural world, and that includes brains as well. Why is it that humans think in particular ways? Why do humans as hypersocial animals crave narratives so much? There's nothing in Area 51, by the way. It was really disappointing. I actually had a really good time. It was really fun. I got flown out on an unmarked aeroplane from McCarran Airport with a bunch of people who work there, and I didn't see any aliens. Disappointed. I was excited, and they were excited. I can tell you, the people who work there love all the excitement about Area 51.
Just because I'm mindful that I think maybe, Thomas, you said you
Sorry.
have to go imminently, but I think as much as I adore all this conversation about the science and, you know, the whole philosophy of science applied to all this. There's already been a lot of talk, including from you, Dallas, about us human brains being addicted to stories and our belief systems and the way that we can project our stories and beliefs onto our experiences, etc. So Thomas, you've got, if you don't mind speaking to this kind of thing, you know, you've got an understanding of the inside of Hollywood, and Disclosure Day just came out, and I know you're associated with the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance, and you're interested in helping that whole process of basically, as I see it, like there's one of my favorite quotes from Picasso, which is art is the lie through which we tell the truth, right? And you want to get,
I love it,
as much of the truth as we can get to via the medium of film in your work and things. So could you, speak to that a bit, perhaps?
This conversation just got eminently more interesting with the contribution of Dallas. I think that in this moment, this really is the most important conversation that we all need to be thinking about and having with each other, how to bridge the gap between what is essentially personal experience and science, which was invented to bridge that gap between what I see and what you see, and how we bring those things together to create a version of the world, an ontology, Dallas, that we can understand together. It is the only conversation worth having in this day and age. So, science is the belief in the ignorance of experts. That's Richard Feynman,
I love
1966.
it, very well said.
He highlights the necessity of skepticism and the continuous questioning of established knowledge for human consciousness to evolve and expand. So what we seem to be having is this incredible disconnect between thousands upon thousands upon thousands. And the more I look into this, I would have to say it's bordering on the millions because of what Susan said earlier, which is experiencers are afraid to speak out because of what Dallas said, that we don't have the evidence. And what happens in this situation is both camps get rather entrenched in their worldviews and say, well, if you don't have any fucking evidence, then why should I look? And the experiencer says, well, if you won't look, then why should I even fucking talk to you? And what we're looking for is this new ontology, a way to bridge the gap between how do we walk Dallas and my father was in biotech, and he started on the ground floor in the 70s with microbiology and genetic engineering and all that stuff. So we had, a woman who cured a certain form of cancer at our dinner parties. And so having this conversation with my father is really what I'm in my head, is what I'm always trying to do, is like, how do I explain, where do we start? Where do we begin? And I think the conspiracies start to be born when we start to look at what's holding us back. And one of the things that I've found is physicalism. We seem to have an entrenched bias toward materialism in our ontology. In other words, science is willing to walk only so far, but as soon as we want to take that step into something that's non-physical, science asks the very important question, which is, how do we even have that conversation? Because if we can't measure it, and we can't touch it, and we can't feel it, see it, measure it, then how do we start to bridge that gap? And where the most interesting work is being done is in consciousness. And I think that Disclosure Day, the government, the conversations are starting, beyond the ridiculous videos, because there are no videos. There are no material, okay, say if we did haul out a flying saucer, the first question would be, well, where have you been hiding that thing and who built it? Because the most parsimonious answer is that some physicist in a basement somewhere built the damn thing. And we'd have to walk that down. So without the actual aliens, we're kind of in a bind. But we do have data. We have enormous amounts of data. We have personal experiences that must be allowed or accepted or tolerated to have these conversations and start to look at other possibilities of what might be going on, because we might be missing an entire domain of reality that we have slowly entrenched ourselves in sort of one way of seeing the world, which is perfectly fine, until this other domain starts to impinge upon our own. And that is what's happening now. We have a persistent phenomenon that is not only getting more seen and more connected with our social media and our technology. We're starting to bridge that gap. A grandmother who had an alien encounter in the 1950s, that story would spread through her family, and maybe a researcher would pick it up. Some people say that it's as many as 1 in 100 that actually get reported. Other people say it's closer to 1 in 10. We don't know. We don't know how many.
Wasn't that the same with fairies and ghosts and other things? People would believe they'd see things like, the Cottingley fairies or whatever it might be, and they'd share experiences and da da da.
That's the other, that's the other part of the conversation, is that what people have been seeing these kind of things for thousands of years, and it is a personal experience. So someone was talking about trauma. When I have an experience, I bring myself to the party. So I have to filter it through my own biases, my own fears, my own personal experiences. Maybe I was sexually abused. Kenneth Ring has done some really good research on trauma and why people seem to be, there seems to be a sort of certain correlation between experiencers and traumatic events in their past. Is that one thing I know from personal experience? My mother was abused, so I've lived with trauma, and she was incredibly sensitive. And this is common with people who've experienced trauma. They have to become even sharper in their protective mechanisms. They have to detect danger. They become extremely good at it. And that might be a part of why people who experience trauma can blow kind of past our normal defenses and detect things that other people haven't. There's also something to do with the psychic phenomenon, and Dean Radin, his research with DNA. So they're finding genetic markers that lead for some people to have more psychic abilities. So the personal becomes part of the objective experience, and filtering the difference between reality, my experience of reality, and then our interpretation of reality. It's a hard problem. We need science. We need them now. We need them to start to look at this stuff now. We need ways to parse the data, and we need minds. We need smart people like Dallas and all the people Dallas knows, and all the people here, I'm sure, have deep connections to academia and science. So that's why this conversation is the most important that we can have.
And just a one tiny thing, and the way that it's being done now, to my mind, is the most beautiful and the healthiest that it can. That's the form that it should take. Very often, that's not the form it does take. And I think there's something to be said about this, because if the conversation is being had in an equitable and respectful way, in a way that both parties agree that maybe there's something to be learned from the other, then it's actually moving somewhere. But very often, and this is not my personal experience because I'm not in academia, but I know enough people in, top institutions that are part of these institutions, and also people who are just like swimming in these waters quite a bit. Very often it gets pretty catty. And I think that needs to be a little bit, like, obviously it's a human endeavor, so it's always going to have some of that. But I think if we are becoming a more mature species, then the question of what we are and how we are should follow us into all the scientific endeavors. I don't mean it in a sappy kind of straight up from a technical standpoint. Like, I think that people will get much further, much faster if they're curious about what others think instead of the sharp elbows of trying to debunk each other on a regular basis. And I'm not saying that that's what science aims to do. Very often, invariably, it's what ending up happening. Again, not on my skin because I haven't experienced it, but I've had enough encounters with very close friends who are in there. And again, Dallas, I basically second everything you said, like 99%. So like we basically were singing the same tune. I'm usually the one saying what you're saying in most circles, just to be clear. I became a little bit more sensitive to the fact that the whole part of the human experience and how we experience meaning, it's actually part of the picture. Like the not just the observer part, but just like how we are animated. It's part of the scientific question, because there might even be certain kinds of truths that we can't even know unless we occupy the right state of being. Like as it was voiced here, even though I have my own reservations about these techniques of like pulling UFOs, but I am of full awareness that there are informational patterns that can become available when people occupy particular states of being. And then the question, what we call them, fairies, aliens, whatever it is, it's less important to me than do they have their own ontological reality on their own side? Like, are there actual agents? That's really the only question. It doesn't matter what we call them, but that's the central question. And that's an open question. I agree. But I think that's where, for me, kind of the emphasis has to be, where this scientist dunked on this scientist, he debunked this guy. That's what people consume most of the time. But like the reality of it is that I don't know if you saw this conversation between Michael Shermer and Avi Loeb, even though obviously Michael Shermer was the kind of the debunker in that conversation. But because they're close friends, I encourage everybody to watch this conversation. It was beautiful because there was so much respect and love, and they've arrived at something. But the criticism was hard hitting. It wasn't like a soft, like it was like, no, I think, obviously he was pointing out very obvious things. Like Avi Loeb was, rapping about gatekeepers, and Michael Shermer very correctly pointed out, I was like, Avi, you're a professor in Harvard. You're the gatekeeper, and you're opening the gate. There we go. That's beautiful, but we should still be responsible with how we think. And then Avi Loeb made a really good point back. He said, let me tell you something. I don't remember when I was going to grad school that somebody taught us that in order to make real progress, we have to be dull and boring. I want my students to be inspired by possibilities as long as they belong in a certain framework of, being reasonable with the data. And if you listen to him closely, he's playing a bit of a linguistic game there where he kind of, he knows that the public won't hear it as what he means to say. But he is, for all intents and purposes, dressing it up a bit with some mystery, but he's not being inaccurate. So there's a lot of the stuff that he's saying, if you actually listen to the words he's using, he's still within the bounds of what's reasonable to say. And I think that's also a good point. So all I'm saying is that what this exchange just was, that was amazing. That I wish we would have a lot more of that.
How do professors teach, groom their students to make money, to survive? And if you don't have a pathway towards studying these kind of phenomenon, that's actually going to, pay the rent, then we have a serious gap in our ability to study these things. Wouldn't you say?
You asking me? I think that we need to acquire a slightly more open-minded attitude towards both. So for me, for example, as a long-term meditator, it's very clear that meditation is an actual science of the inner world. In science, we observe something closely, the object that we're trying to study, in this case, our internal experience. We develop methods to replicate certain processes and things to happen. And if we can reliably replicate these states and communicate to others in such a way that they can replicate that state, that's a science that becomes a technology, which is exactly what we're doing. Just in this case, the object of observation is observation itself, but without it. And then, of course, there's methods like Richie Davidson, that did studies over 4 decades with these things and discovered that actually, yes, that's a real ability you can show in a functional MRI. And he, by the way, somewhat embarrassingly discovered that actually some very known, very long-term practitioners or even masters of meditation, they suck at it. they actually don't know how to do it. Like after 40 years, they actually don't know how to meditate properly because it's an actual ability. So there's a thing there that is invisible to the eye.
Yep.
And the rules of science gives us a beautiful handle on how to potentially talk about these things. But in the end of the day, the direct experience we have of things is the first point of contact we have with all the things we're studying. We wouldn't know about light unless we would have eyes. Maybe we would have arrived at it through like ears and whatever. Yeah, sure. There's auxiliary ways to reach things, but if you would have none of the senses, so what if interacting, what we a very common thread obviously running through all this discussion about DMTs, is it real in the sense that maybe, and this is something that now Andrew Gallimore and Donald Hoffman like partnered on, which is like, can we find a mathematical way to describe this kernel of experience that can give us potentially a way to actually study what we can predict about experience, like forward in the future, instead of like kind of just observing what already happened. So these attempts are very rudimentary, but notice that they required certain individuals to step a little bit outside of how the norm of how things are done in academia. And some of them paid the price. Some of them found a way to make it palatable. But at the end of the day, this has to happen. For me, the way that I kind of see the future of science, capital S science, like the science of a mature species, is just the enterprise of human understanding.
Thank you,
Full
Dan.
stop.
Sounds like a bunch of woo, and you can't make a Zoom call out of it.
Can I bring David in
Yeah.
now? Because David is a scientist that studies weird shit. So I thought that he is the best person to bring in at this point.
And his virtual hand must be very
His
tight.
virtual hand is.
I mean, I've only had my hand up so long because, well, I missed the beginning and I missed a bit in the middle, and I'll probably miss the end because I've got like dash and do some put the kid to bed. But so I'll only kind of talk to the bits I did hear, thankfully, and that was just something that Dallas said has now disappeared. And he's talking about, I'm interested in the nuts and bolts. What is real? And it's like, well, like nuts and bolts is interesting as a concept of reality. Like what is actually real is what we experience, right? There's not much else we can be sure of, actually. And interestingly, on the concept of nuts and bolts, some of those earliest sightings of what used to be called UFOs were often at the reaches of what people could imagine technologically. They would be seen with panels and rivets holding them together, and they got more sleek and less kind of retro engineered as time went on and more sightings went. So, and this ties in. So these events are filtered through our consciousness at the very least, and the limits of our kind of imagination and cognition, at least in how they can be languaged and described, but not necessarily in how they're kind of apprehended in the first place. But it's probably through some kind of experience of consciousness directly, not UFOs in the physical world, so called. Good friend of mine, Anton, at the weekend, it was in discussion of aliens. He said he had encounter with this kind of alien being. It was kind of there. It had many of them, mostly through DMT, and the aliens there, and it's like, what do you stupid humans think that we're the most advanced technology in this part of the galaxy or in the nearest galaxy, and we're gonna get in our super like spaceships, travel several light years just to come to Earth and then crash at Roswell? It's kind of preposterous idea that you can have such sophisticated technology and then you prang the motor at the last second into a kind of like airbase. It's like, but and it's just like we travel through time and space directly through consciousness. So if aliens are real, and it's a big if, but then I very much doubt you're ever going to get your nuts and bolts, other than in the interpretations people see in kind of very old spaceships, but you don't get them anymore. So I thought I'd toss that, and I thought I'd also just very quickly respond to what Thomas said, and said, we have the data, and on that note, we are collecting data about a particular kind of encounter experience, which appears as much in alien abduction or alien encounter experiences as it does with DMT and other psychedelics, and also spontaneously, and that is encounters with giant mantid creatures, beings. We're putting out a survey on that. And I'm delighted to say it's my first time appearing in Playboy, not as a, naked or anything, but just advertising our survey. And so if anyone's had any mantid encounters or likes Playboy, then please fill in our survey. That's all I've got to say. I've got to go and put my daughter to bed now. Sorry for dipping in and out. It's fascinating.
Cheers, Dave.
Susan.
Hi, thank you, David. I just wanted to say a couple things on the idea of science because I'm not a scientist, but I am married to a professional scientist who does look into UFOs. First of all, this is still very much a stigmatized topic within STEM and in the academy. Trying to get a paper published on this subject, regardless of having Avi Loeb out there or the Society of UAP Studies, who are trying to bring some legitimate focus to this, people in STEM careers are still having a very difficult time trying to get the subject being taken seriously and trying to even just get a paper published. Like my husband has put out papers and, just trying to get them out there. You have to try and use a language where you're not going to try and use UAP because you automatically know that as soon as it gets in front of an editor, they're going to say, we don't want to touch this. Go publish elsewhere. There's very few journals and that or places where scientists can openly talk about this without even fact jeopardizing their own career. But I do think it's getting better, but there's still a long way to go with that. And I also want to put out that one of the reasons that I think people have a difficult time coming forward and talking about this subject is because it was willfully stigmatized. And there's a well-established history of this by the American intelligence services who wanted to put this subject away. I do not believe that they are hiding alien spaceships. I do believe that they have some physical traces that they probably have not made public for whatever reasons of national security. I truly believe they don't know what they have. I believe experiencers know more about what this phenomena is. Vis-a-vis personal gnosis, fine. But I think they know more than our governments is. I think that's the big secret that they're hiding is that something is invading the sky, something is out there, and they don't know what it is. And you know what? Maybe we have to start looking at other cultures and other things as well. Talking to the indigenous people, seeing what their stories are, seeing how they experience things. But yeah, I mean, in Western culture at least, which is dominated by US culture, yeah, it has been purposely stigmatized. And there's a whole history behind that. So that's not just conspiracy theory. And up until 2017, when it started coming out in the New York Times, people started becoming more comfortable. You have these pilots, from the US military coming forward and saying, we've had these weird experiences. We don't know what they are, like Alex Dietrich and Dave Favor, whatever it is they saw. The fact that they came out publicly is making it easier for people to talk. And I just hope that that continues forward because that is a huge part of the problem. And it is still a problem within the academy and within the sciences. And I'm just going to also put out quickly, I think part of the big problem with the scientific inquiry is it is incomplete because you have got the separation of the material, the matter, and the consciousness. And consciousness is absolutely part of this. And if you talk to anybody who's actually experienced this, they will tell you it is coming from within and without. And all the science can do is look at whatever little physical traces are left. Sometimes there's radar signatures, there's all sorts of these things. But beyond that, it's incomplete. We need more. We need the humanities and the sciences in some way working together and informing each other. And that maybe we'll get a little tip of the iceberg of what this really is. So thanks. Sorry if I sounded really passionate, but I love this subject. It's colored my whole life. So I feel very, I'm passionate about the subject.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned indigenous cultures and ancient history and all this kind of stuff as well, because I kind of think that is a really good place to look. Scientifically, that's a really good place to look. And indigenous cultures and ancient people were also scientists who analyzed the world to the best of their ability with tools and inventions and designs and plans and maps. Mm-hmm. And actually incredible embodied knowledge about how the world and the cosmos works. So that is science. That still is science. And you might
100%. They understood the
a lot of that science was also taken from millennia of observation. So it's crazy to throw that knowledge, just because it doesn't present itself in the same way that a scientific paper does or a lab experiment does, as not valid. I think it makes so much sense. And in many ways, like those ancient myths that we have, or those stories about relationships between different plants and animals that are turned into stories, make scientific information accessible and rememberable for the communities that it serves. So the myth of the descent of Inanna, as it relates to the descent of Venus and things like this, it actually makes it much more memorable, but it still encodes real scientific fact as well, and use, you know, laws that help you navigate the world. And I guess that is sometimes what modern science, because, you know, I work with a lot of specialists, I work with a lot of scientists, historians, Egyptologists, all these people working on their own little niche and not connecting it holistically, even though very often all of these things, you look at studies in Egyptology, if you had a project that was an Egyptological project, really you need to be working with someone who's a specialist in ancient plants, in ancient constellations. All these things need to be meshed together to really understand that world. So I do think there's an ancient science, or there are ancient sciences that are more holistic in their understanding, because they're looking at how humanity relates to the stars and to the earth, which actually gives science a framework in order to understand itself, which is actually a bit more scientific than everyone specializing in their own little, you know, do pseudo scorpions have genitals? Jason.
Yeah, that is a perfect. I don't know about the pseudo scorpion genitals, but Jason, you don't need to pick up on that. That'd be great if you could. But generally, what Sarah said, this will be perfect, I think, for you to jump into.
Yeah, I mean, this is my whole background. I mean, I've written 4 books right now on that subject alone, which is like the astrotheology of ancient cultures, and taking the myths and the shamanism and the plants and the animals and the stars, and basically showing the stories that are based off of this shamanic knowledge of the seasons and the cycles and nature in general. So that's kind of where my path has led me, is to kind of breaking all these different cultures down in that kind of mindset. But I'd like to also get back to this experience with aliens, which is the topic here, is that I came into this community from like completely left field, because, you know, I wasn't looking to come into this community. I wasn't looking into aliens or anything like this. And I started to have sleep paralysis. And it was through sleep paralysis that led to out of body experiences. From out of body experiences, it's like a door was open to contact, to downloads or information. And it led me into Qigong and ancient civilizations and trying to figure all this stuff out. And it led me into shamanism. So I've studied with shamans around the world, worked with different plant medicines as well. But what's really interesting with this whole alien aspect is that I think the phenomenon is multifaceted. And we really have to kind of break it down before we could like lump it all together. For example, I was having these out of body experiences without any drugs. Just it would happen spontaneously or through meditation or qigong. And sometimes when you would leave the body, you would come in contact with beings that people would describe in abduction scenarios. Or you would have these experiences that are very much like shamanic journeys, where you're being operated on or being healed by entities without the assistance of any drugs whatsoever. It just spontaneously happens. So for me, I came into this through this perspective of the shamanic world and the shamanic journey. And once we enter that space, what really blew my mind is that, oh man, this is what these abductees are talking about. These are the mantid beings, or this is a gray alien, or this is a reptilian. Like, and for me, it was an out of body experience that I knew I was having. And then when I come back into the physical, it's like they could be standing right there in the room with you. With your eyes, you can't see them. And then you have this kind of altered state, and they're right there in the room. They can work with you, take you on a journey. You could have communications. And so that's one aspect of things. the other aspect of things is, and I heard Susan talking about Ontario. I'm from Ontario as well. And I've had so many sightings in Ontario where I've seen, let's say, like the triangle ships where they're so close to the tree line that you can see like the metallic rivets, for example, and just hovering over the tree line, I could look at it and go, okay, this is military. This is like made on Earth. And I'm pretty sure there's evidence to even prove that because, back in the early 19th century, Nikola Tesla basically put out that he built this engine that says it does everything that a UFO can do. So that's an historical fact. So maybe that's out there. And then I've seen these orbs over the lake, these giant, like glowing red orbs that I could probably throw a stone through them. And I would say that's a completely different class of understanding, completely different. So there's so much to this phenomenon, and we have to kind of go through the personal experiences, have the experiences, see what's happening in the real world, and put these all together with ancient myths. And it's just a fascinating topic. So I'm here to answer any questions if anybody has anything.
So much, Jason. That was great. Pascal, any questions?
Well, I mean, I do want to get to other people, of course, that have their hands up. But just since you asked about questions, we had a little synchronistic moment. Not only do we have the same birthday as did another person on a panel about synchronicity, which was fantastic. But we were talking about a sleep paralysis experience I had. And then you opened the book directly in front of you, which is one of your own books. And it was an image and description of the Egyptian part of the human being, which is the Shayot, right? And the shadow, as it were, and it had this circular, this black circle with the picture of the shadow, and it was a kind of Egyptian hieroglyph for the exact experience that I was just describing to you. So, do you think you could speak a bit to that in terms of, and you said you started to have sleep paralysis, the relationship between sleep paralysis, these abduction type events, so within which like these shadow type beings can emerge, and the Egyptian paradigm for that?
Sure. I would say that it's all an initiation journey. So all of this is a shamanic initiation. And so when I first left my body, the first thing I saw was I saw myself in bed. So I had the experience of looking at myself from the ceiling. And the next thing was seeing that there was a giant shadow at the foot of my bed. Now, progressively, as I learned to leave my body, the shadow would accompany me in certain journeys, and portals would open up in the room to take me from place to place. So I was going through ancient Egyptian artwork, and I came across this picture of the shadow, which is part of the body, it's the soul, and it stands in the funerary door. So it's depicted in the funerary door, and then above the dead, deceased body of the person, you have the ba, which is hovering above it, and then in the background, you have this kind of black shape. And sometimes they have stars in this black shape. It's almost like a portal to the other world because in Egyptian theology, that's what it's about. It's about when you leave your body, you travel and you go on the path of the stars to the northern sky to become immortal, to join the Ba and the Ka together to be the Ak, the shining one, the stars in the heaven. So for me, it was quite an incredible mirror because even without knowing anything about Egypt or anything about these practices, because they were just happening to me, I wasn't learning about them. I was just observing and going through the process. It's like in my own experiences, I would leave my body, so I'd be like the Ba above the dead deceased body. There would be the shadow in the room with me, and a portal would open up, and we'd go on these journeys. So when I started to see this in ancient Egyptian artwork, it just solidified my perception that this was a real phenomenon, that it's a human phenomenon, and it's been documented in very ancient cultures. And I believe that we've kind of lost this ability because of it's kind of censored for 2000 plus years. They don't talk about it. It's demonized. And when people do have these experiences for the first time, it's a real jolt to the system. It's very terrifying. You come in contact with entities, you have no idea what they are, and you pray to God that it never happens again because it's so traumatic. But there is this type of initiation process, that you go through over the years. I've been doing this for over 20 years. So, for me, it's just a normal human experience. And it's just part of being this multidimensional self that the Egyptians were well aware of. You have the physical body, you have the Ka body, Ba body, the shadow. You have all these aspects of yourself that you can actually experience. So when I'm traveling and the shadow's behind me, we're speaking telepathically between each other in the same voice. So I believe that the mythologies and the knowledge from Egypt, or even going back to Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, and getting into Plato, they were telling the exact same stories in different lenses, I would say. Same story, different lenses.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. That's a really good example of how obviously there were scientists in ancient Egypt. They just had different names from, they didn't wear lab coats, they had more exciting outfits of leopard skins and whatnot. But they essentially were working with observations that had been taken for 2,000 years. And it's an extremely long culture of observation, scientific understanding about the way things work. And they conceived of a living sky and of a living cosmos and a live planet and a living earth. And as soon as you have that story, if that's your story of what the world is, then everything is living, everything has the ability to communicate with you. And I think this multi-dimensional self makes so much sense. You also have that Ren, that first name that you're given when you're born. You have that as an anchor into reality, into people remembering who you are. And there's this idea that if you have your Ren obliterated, no one on earth remembers you, and then everything kind of ceases to exist for those people on earth. So I think the understanding of that multi-dimensional self over such a long period of time, and it having that consistency as well, enables people to make sense of their world in a special way. And now there are so many different fragmented ways, and we are so kind of connected internationally all across the world, that we are coming into contact with all these different ideas all the time. There's not this like one story that we all know. There's not this one book of coming forth by day where we can make sense of our extra dimensional travels, because ultimately even science is a story. Science has story like elements to it, because we have this, like someone said, this kind of physical material way of perceiving the world, the earth, even the stars and the planets. But there obviously is an enormous amount of stuff that we don't understand. And actually, when I was chatting to Chris Bledsoe, when I first decided to do this panel, I had this flashback of a memory of being a child. And I write about dreaming, so I've always been really interested in lucid dreaming, had a lucid dream since I was a kid, had lots of experiences that are non-ordinary states of consciousness, like prolonged hypnagogic states, out-of-body experiences, things like that. But I suddenly remembered this thing that I'd forgotten about, which was I used to see orbs regularly, but they were like, I just called them bubbles. And I used to see them usually in daylight, but they were all just around a pond that was in the field next to my house, and I never saw them anywhere else. I just used to see them next to this pylon, and it got me thinking, like, there are these other kinds of subtle phenomena. There are these subtle phenomena that we just don't understand scientifically, because we aren't consistently observing the same landscape, the same sky, night after night, day after day. We are moving around all the time, and so our information is kind of disjointed. So there is obviously a lot that science doesn't currently understand. And I think I can see us approaching this new era of science where we start to properly recognize that everything that's gone before, ancient history, trying to kind of calibrate everything from anecdotal, mythological, historical, cultural contexts, to have this much more multi-dimensional approach to science, if you like. Danny.
Thank you. Yeah, I actually had some comments for Dallas, but I see he hopped off, and I don't think it's fair for me to say anything unless he would be here. All I will say then is the part that I do understand about his argumentation is that very often, in the name of humility and kind of staying open-minded, we do allow some things to seep in that sometimes we shouldn't. Like, for example, we refer to historical inaccuracies that actually, like relatively easily demonstrably not true, that people believe very strongly, let's say. But in the end of the day, whatever it is, like you said, the scientists of the past, like what you're describing right now, Jason, that's absolutely incredible. But notice that the reason that it's so matter of fact for you is because you've been doing this for 20 years. So like you said, it's regular enough. And what I'm always sensitive, because, my work also to some degree revolves around pretty outlandish claims, I'm always very sensitive to the receiving end of the information. So if somebody never had that experience, I don't see any good reason for them to accept it for 1 second. And then on the other hand, we who had certain kinds of experiences, we don't really feel like we need to be apologetic about, like, well, you have your experience of the world. I clearly see there's other regularities. So this creates an invisible filament of tension that if we just become more aware, that's what I'm trying to do to the best of my ability. It actually eliminates a lot of the tension. So it's almost like, look, I know that if you haven't had the experience, it's completely understandable why, like that little phrase, it won't always work, as you saw at the end of my little diatribe, right? But in the end of the day, we should always kind of be aware of that, because I am noticing also, which frustrates me, to be quite honest as well. People very often kind of run with the thing that feels the best for them, but we do want to know what's true. Like everything you just said rings very true for me, because I've had a lot of other encounters with people who told me pretty much like super similar things, or enough in the ballpark to be like, yeah, there's clearly something going on here. And these are people that are not hyperbolic in nature. They're not trying to just get attention, things like this. And I've had certain kinds of experiences, not these exactly, but other ones that I can attest to them. So yeah, like it feels as real as anything, or even more real. But then what I'm really interested in, how do we create this kind of conversation that isn't triggering for all the different ways of perceiving the world? I'm really interested in, like, how do we become the actual corpus callosum of the human global mind, so the left and the right hemisphere of the human mind can actually speak to each other, because I think that's when the proverbial gates to heaven open up. And if we actually learn how to work with these two kind of, thank God for science, because we can do all of this, right? But and this was my comment, not in a mean way to Dallas, but like, if the impression is that science is about building Zoom, then I think there's some confusion here. My take is that science is about understanding. Technologies arise from better understandings of the world, but so it goes both ends. Like, we have to be more open-minded about what certain people report, but at the same time, the famous, who was it, Terence McKenna, open your mind, but not so much that your brain will fall out. So I'm always kind of like, we're in that, trying to walk that fine line. So I guess I'll just leave it there.
Danny. Sinead.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Sinead. I'm often the lone Canadian in these things, so I don't know if there's anyone else from Canada here, but I'm based in Toronto. A lifelong experiencer, and was working with children for my entire life from age 11, became a special needs educator, and then started going through what you might call the dark night of the soul. And NHI pretty much arrived in my life and did not go looking for them, was not involved in any of this at all, was not thinking about UFOs, not thinking about NHI, not thinking about consciousness. And apparently I created this opportunity for myself to come into this field. And I just want to speak specifically to ontological shock, the topic of that. I also would really, really love to hear from the two First Nations women that are in this group with us right now, Amy and Morgan. I would really love to hear what they have to say, because my experience is that the more I hear about and learn about ontological shock, I'm now working in consciousness research, by the way. I work for Tom Campbell's, or a nonprofit that Tom Campbell established, and is now a very dynamic organization researching consciousness in a variety of different ways. We have not yet moved into specifically the UAP experiencer area in our research, but I see that as being inevitable, essentially, because all of these things are intersecting more and more and more, and we understand now that they are not separate from each other. And my personal view is that consciousness is fundamental. That's my opinion. Can't prove it, of course, but I feel like it lends a lot of validity to a wide variety of experiences that people have in this field. So with regard to ontological shock, the more I learn about it, the more I read about it, hear about it, think about it, reflect on it myself, I have to speak to my own reality and that of many other people in this field that I feel like is not often referred to. Maya Cowan, by the way, who's going to be speaking at SCU and on a panel for the Visible College next week in DC that Anthony organized and I will help to support. She's going to be talking about this from an academic viewpoint. And what it is that ontological shock, in my personal perspective, is overplayed in this field. I feel like it happens a lot less than people think it does. I feel like it's a little bit of a problematic phrase to use. Not that it doesn't happen. It definitely does happen. Don't get me wrong. But I think that in this Western psychology that we all share, we have been extremely oriented towards fear-based thinking, fear-based feeling, fear-based perspective. And I think that it is so ingrained in how we operate within ourselves, each other, the world, society, that it's actually normalized and we don't realize how much we're doing it. We don't realize how much we're coming from a place of fear, apprehension. So my own experience is that coming into this field through NHI, arriving in my life very dramatically on more than one occasion, including arriving in my living room in the middle of the day, no psychedelics, nothing weird going on. They arrived after watching Jeremy Corbell's documentary about Bob Lazar in Area 51, which I knew nothing about. And that's really what kickstarted it for me. I had met them previously in 2017 in Peru, but didn't realize that I had. And the experience for me was not ontologically shocking. I would say it was definitely enormous. It was absolutely drastically, pervasively, profoundly life-changing in ways that have been nothing but powerful and positive for me. But it was not shocking. It was not disorienting. I did not go into, a depression or start worrying about who I was or my life. I had little periods of that, but it was not a dominant experience for me. Rather, my experience was familiarity, joy, comfort, reassurance. Finally, I'm getting this information that I've been looking for all my life. I didn't even know what it was that I was looking for, but I was looking for it. And when the NHI arrived in my life, and I now have an ongoing relationship with them, the experiences of a sense of, thank God, I finally can see myself out in the universe, out in the world. I recognize myself now and where I belong here, because for my entire life previous to that, I felt like a weirdo that nobody understood. I felt like I was an observer, that I was not really part of what was going on here. I felt that I was just watching all this strange, nonsensical, illogical, impractical behavior and choices of human beings around me. And I really felt very not connected, disconnected, not connected, not relating to what I was seeing around me. And when the NHI arrived and started telling me, which I had not thought of at all previously, they told me, you agreed to be here. You agreed to be here at this time. You agreed to be in this body, in this reality, at this specific time on Earth. You have a job to do, you have work to do, and it's time for you to get going. That was in 2019. And nothing has ever made more sense to me than this experience. So for me, ontological shock is not part of my reality. It's part of what I know other people experience, and I think it's absolutely real. But I think this aspect, this narrative, which I also hear in many people I meet, this feeling of recognition of like, oh, relief, now finally the world, cosmology, the universe, all of this makes more sense to me now. And you feel comfort, you feel relief, you feel a sense of home, returning to home. And for me personally, these NHI feel like my family. I have parents who love me. I have a family. They don't see me or understand me the way that the NHI do. I feel seen and heard and understood by them in a way I never have by any human being. So, what is that about? That's a complicated topic as well. There's no answer, there's no proof, but it's something that is experienced widely by many, many people around the world. It's not a life-changing, oh my God, what is reality? I don't know who I am. I feel totally discombobulated and shocked and depressed and stunned. It's the opposite of that. So considering that our experience or narrative covers the gamut of a wide range of experiences that people have when they encounter NHI, when they encounter UAP, when they encounter the consciousness narrative, It all matters, right? So I would love to hear from anyone else who has a similar experience. I would love to hear from Morgan and Amy on the cosmology of First Nations people who have a thousands and thousands and thousands year old relationship with this phenomena and understand it, in my view, much more deeply than any of us do in science or Western ways of thinking. Yeah, I just wanted to say that. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Sinead.
Thank you so much, Sinead, for that. And I think, Morgan, would you mind jumping in there? And then hopefully it'll be lovely to hear from Amy as well. But Morgan, since Sinead was speaking to the American Indian First Nation aspect of things, as well as observation that ontological shock may not be as pressing, but it's been interesting to see in the chat David Luke talking about the paper that I was also involved in about yes, it's psychedelic related, but how ontological challenges are one of some of the most prevalent of ones. So, and you're an art therapist, and we've spoken about that, your path and mission in helping people that may have had these kinds of experiences, may have had very positive experiences akin to what Sinead is talking about, but still need support, and how you see maybe the future of support within art therapy from other modalities, whatever you'd like to speak to.
Okay, yes. Well, I grew up as an experiencer. I will start there. The onological shock, mine was a bit different. Whenever I was a child, we had, and I've experienced different beings, and I feel that each being has a different experience, provokes a different experience. And when we were children, we experienced shadow beings in our home that were they communicated very prevalently. And we decided as children to learn how to communicate back. We were a little bit terrified of them, but we were also intrigued by them and we wanted to learn more about them. So it began with banging, and we would hear crying at night. We would have black handprints appearing on the walls that would not go away. They would disappear, reappear. And we've actually even seen the black shadows crawling towards us, and that caused a huge fear from a lot of us. And that was the onological shock process of where we weren't sure of what they were why they were there. And then it brings up the idea of that shadow being maybe a separate part of us, because there were 3 shadows and there were always 3 of us. So it led me into diving and trying to understand these shadows better. So then we began finding different forms of communication to communicate with these. And first we did Ouija boards, and we did different, we just would communicate out loud to them. As children, we thought that we could bang and do chanting with pots and pans around the house and try to influence their energy. And it would work. They would always communicate back, and like stomps and banging. And then we found light communication, which this happened after my aunt, who was one of the 3 people that experienced this with me, committed suicide or died by suicide. And seemingly enough, the person, we found out that the history of the house, the woman before that lived there died by suicide the same way, by train. And so that's when we started really, a lot of my family developed a fear towards these shadows and us communicating with them. But then there was still this connection I felt towards it all. And Sarah, you brought up like teenage girls having this energy and things like that. So when she passed away, that was the most profound after death communication that I have ever had. We had her cell phone, and it was turned off in airplane mode, and it was calling her twin sister multiple times. And then I watched my door, the screws of my door unscrew, and my door fell off of the hinges directly in front of me. And then we had her school picture go flying across the room and shatter. And we've had multiple others as well. So I really feel that it is dependent on the person. We had some people that experienced a traumatic fear towards these towards these experiences, and then there were others who, like me and my aunt, her twin sister, who were curious. So then we developed light communication, and I don't know how we discovered it. It almost like came to us. And we would use a flashlight, and you could like unscrew the flashlight just a little bit so it was sensitive to touch. And you would ask questions, and the flashlight, you would like train the spirit to communicate with this light, like to turn on for yes, turn off for no. And then through that, we developed this relationship with these beings in the house, and there were multiple of them. And so then, some of my family developed a fear, and it kind of got shut off. And they don't embrace our cultural indigenous history. They very just very whitewashed, I would say, and colonized, and that affected me as well. So then I went into this dark place and lost myself for a while. And whenever I went out of touch with this side of things too, and I just wanted to shut it all off because I listened to those around me. So I shut it off for many years, and that developed like a darkness within me. And it wasn't until I had a near-death experience whenever I was 19, and my heart stopped from a car accident. And afterwards, it reawakened everything about me, and allowed me to try to reconnect with this realm of things. And I was receiving downloads and wisdom, and wanting to just connect with trying to figure out what life is, what consciousness is, what all of this is. So then that brought me here, and then I started researching into different indigenous sites and petroglyphs, and trying to figure out what their messages were and their prophecies. And then that led me to Skinwalker Ranch. And when I was at Skinwalker Ranch, I had telepathic communication with UAP, or symbolic telepathic communication. And I imagined that, okay, maybe they can communicate through symbolism because of the art therapy. I kind of just thought of this symbolic communication. So I imagined, and I didn't tell anyone around me that I was doing this. I just sat on a rock away from everyone by my lonesome, connecting with these UAP. And they were already forming triangular crafts in the sky in triangular shapes. So I decided to do my own little experiment and envision specific shaped triangles like isosceles. And so I would imagine various shaped triangles. And I did this about 4 or 5 times, and it was a successful initiation and conversation, but all times. So they would directly align and create the symbol of the triangle that I was imagining in my mind, and I could tell that they knew what I was thinking. They knew I was communicating with them. And then that really opened the door for me, and I found all of this community of people, because like we've all shared, it's hard to really express these things to people who haven't experienced it firsthand. And that's where the art therapy comes into play, of where I really want to allow experiencers. I think I think that art is a great way to communicate your experience to those who have never seen, who can't imagine these things. And it's a way to kind of like tap into that world, and they can communicate through art as well, and you become like a vessel in a way. So that's what brought me here. And yes, I'm just trying to basically like remove the stigma in therapeutic practice and try to bridge that gap of how do we help and what is a framework that allows us to bridge art therapy and parapsychology and examine psi phenomena and better understand it. So sorry, that's my spiel.
Beautiful spiel. Thank you.
Amy, would you like to say anything?
Sure, I'd be happy to share, and thank you for the opportunity. Amy Ishtiska Amachiapi, Oglala Lakota Oyate Emataha. My name is Amy White Eyes. I am from the Oglala Lakota Nation. My family live on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in so-called South Dakota. I currently live in the Hudson Valley, New York, which has its own infinite amount of stories in this subject and matter, and certainly an interesting space and place to dream. I am a trained herbalist. I work with plants, and I work at an acupuncture clinic in the town where I live as an herbal practitioner. But I love teaching plant communication and helping folks reconnect with their inherent ability to communicate with the earth from our indigenous perspective. And namely, I'm speaking from my own people, Lakota. I can't speak for others. We're not a monolith. And anything I say today, you can find in a book. I won't speak on shared oral history that hasn't been documented without permission. But many of my elders have their own experiences with star people. One of the more famous ones, I would say, in this space, his name is Chief Golden Light Eagle, who received his own download from the Galactic Federation, and he has 3 printed books, and his daughter currently leads a monthly star circle for each new moon, which is what we follow in Lakota tradition. We believe that when we're born, we come from stars, where our spirit is born from a star, and when we die, we return. We're very connected to what is known as the Big Dipper. And if you think about the human body, we are made of stardust. We're made of minerals from the earth. All the water in our body has circulated through the sky, through animals, through plants. And it's so beautiful to think about how connected we all really are. So in the Lakota way, we say mitakuye oyasan, we are all related. And this means that we treat every plant as our kin, every animal, every living being. The chair you're sitting in, if it's wooden, it's alive and has a spirit. Rocks, water especially carries stories, memories, and ceremonies. So when I teach plant communication, it's similar to some of this ontological shock therapy of I think to me it's inner discernment. I also have a teacher named Wendy Tividad who is a clairvoyant and was featured on a podcast called Otherworld. I've taken a few of her classes, which help you deepen into your intuition and your own clair ability. And I also believe that we all have the ability inherently within us to tap into each other's heart fields. Our heartbeat gives off a resonance that's scientifically 6 feet all around us. So when you're with someone you love, your heartbeats sync. When you're with your best friends, your heartbeats sync as one. And this is similar to horses who travel in packs. So when their heartbeats sync, and when one of them senses danger on the perimeter, they're all alerted to it. So again, just many different examples of how similar we are to each other. But for the plant communication pieces, especially when I'm introducing the activity to a class, I like to speak about how colonized our imaginations are. And when we are born until we enter the school systems, we have everything is alive, everything is real to us. We don't doubt what we see. We don't doubt what we kind of, I like that word download or things, dreams, imagination. But when we enter the school system, that starts to become trained out of us. So it's sit down, pay attention, lock in. You got to get a job when you get out of here. And we kind of lose touch with that inherent ability to really I guess in the Western sense of things, tap in. And so if we can reconnect with that childlike wonder and that ability to instead ask, is this real? To say, well, what else? What else? That is a beautiful question to ask when we're having things come into our mind. When, I began this plant meditation, and I speak to the plant meditations because they're such a beautiful way to kind of, I guess, prove in a scientific sense and shared experience. After we meditate with the plant, we'll go around and everyone will share, and inevitably there's across cultures, different people's backgrounds, because we are all indigenous to some land on this earth. And if we research our ancestors and eat our ancestral foods, our DNA awakens inside of us. But it's really amazing how, someone who has heritage in Scotland can have a shared experience with someone from China. The plants have, so much to share with us, messages that are just for us and from our experience. So yes, that's what I like to say about imagination. I loved a lot of the conversation around, Western science isn't indigenous science. And as I mentioned in the chat, they do complement each other. I'd encourage anyone to read the book Fresh Banana Leaves to kind of speak to this indigenous science. I think Jessica Hernandez is the author, and she's doing really great work to kind of decolonize that conversation. And yes, the decolonization of it all is such a sticky word, but, the release of having to live in a systemized, categorized, defined world is the antithesis to what we're experiencing. And I think it's really interesting how desperate the culture seems to see and experience, but we're moving so fast. Our technology is just moving us at 90 miles an hour. We're on the computer all day, but the most simple thing you can do is go outside and sit and just be and have no expectation. Don't bring a book, just sit there and see what comes up. And this is something that, as Indigenous people, we practice. We do our hambleches, we fast and pray for days in nature and receive visions and have messages from our ancestors that come to us during these times. And that's something, as you can do on your own as well. We don't use plant medicine for psychedelic experiences. This is an all natural, inherent gift. So yeah, I just encourage folks to kind of practice those sit spots, experiment with, hey, what if we do fast for a day, and how does that feel? And maybe offer something to the land you live on and begin that relationship with reciprocity, because that's when the world begins to open up. And I know I've spoken on a lot of different things right now, but I'm happy to answer any questions in that way. But I also wanted to mention that I think the plant connection here, it's funny, it's almost literal, right? Like our eyes and our thoughts are all up in space. And while those are our relatives and we're desperate to see, I think the plants are here to bring us back down and really return us to our soul and just really ground us and remind us, okay, we are a part of all of this. And so I think that relationship can go hand in hand with that they're therapeutic support with the ontological shock, the ecological grief that we're experiencing through climate change, etc. Okay, I'll stop there. Don't get me going. Pilama yaye wafila tanka for the opportunity to speak today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy. That was really wonderful. And I feel like I've had that feeling, like you say, about childhood, where the world seems alive, where you're always living in the imagination to some extent, and then you go through the school system and you're told what things are and how you are supposed to perceive. And then even just in terms of our own brain development, you have that neuronal pruning back when you go through puberty. And one of the exercises I do with dreaming is remember a memory from before that time of neuronal pruning, where even like the bathroom taps in your childhood home seem to be like alive, living things that have so much character that you can see in such high definition. And I was talking before we went online about playing when you're a child as well, and our kind of fluid experience of time. Like everything becomes a bit more solid and a little bit more real or black and white as we get older. And you mentioned your people have this this culture, these stories that help you to see a living world, because it's a storied world. And I guess that's the problem for a lot of people in the West, is we don't really have a story anymore.
But you can look to your ancestors, and from wherever they came from, there are stories, there are plants, there are traditions. And when we look back, you have to look back. If you have the ability to do that, it's so rich. It's so rich. And I wanted to say one other thing that's slipping my mind, but I just, I think too, it's important in this work. It's easy to say these ancient stories, or like the indigenous people did think this and did this, but we do that now. And I think the absence of our presence in these conversations is just like such a big gap of missing information, and it's written off because it's oral knowledge and it's not proven. Again, this comes down to that Western science versus indigenous science, but bringing that into the conversation, going and talking to the people who are here, like, I think that's so important to what we're going to learn here, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree.
Yeah.
Thank you very
And the imagination piece too, it's all in the interest of money and the system. So, getting backing up from that and really letting your imagination run wild. And I love the cues of the bathroom taps. If you can just pull little threads like that, that'll definitely help.
Thank you very much, Amy. Sinead?
Thank you. Yeah, just really quickly, loved what Amy and Morgan had to say. Love what everyone has to say here. This is a great conversation. And thank you so much, Sarah and Pascal, for hosting this for us. I just want to say that working in the scientific field at this pivotal time, and in a kind of frontier science capacity, is fascinating, because what we're uncovering is, early on in this conversation, we were discussing science quite a bit, and science's place in all of this. Like, what does science need to do to meet us where we're at, in terms of consciousness, experiences that can't be explained? And something that Amy just said made me think of that, because she was saying how, here the indigenous people, First Nations people, apparently I'm also indigenous because I'm Irish and my genetics are incredibly strong in terms of Celtic connection. So, but I don't feel like I can speak specifically from that perspective yet. I'm very interested in my ancestral lineage. I've gone back to Ireland many, many times to investigate that, talk to my family. And lived experience is so powerful, right? I mean, stories are incredibly powerful. They're a big part of how we create our reality. We don't only use facts for that. We use experience and experiential wisdom. And that has been alive in Indigenous cultures for thousands of years. So, as Amy was saying, it's not proven yet. It's alive and well. It's dynamic. It's sophisticated. It's intelligent. It's lasted all this time, right? And we still look to it for information, guidance, wisdom. So what's interesting to me is science seems to, on a very rudimentary, kind of high level, mainstream perspective, it seems to give us truth and facts, right, that help us orient ourselves in reality. But as we've been discussing about here, science is a living document. It's not always correct. Things that we think that are correct now are going to be incorrect in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. Even Einstein was not correct about everything, right? He's a commonly referred to genius in science. He was wrong about several things, and he was open to being wrong. So science has to flex its parameters as to what's acceptable for study and what isn't. But what's also fascinating is that science, as Anthony pointed out in the chat a little bit, science begins as a subjective experience. It begins subjectively, right? So then we eliminate the subjective and we only allow for the objective. That's the sort of mainstream perspective of it. But it's not actually true as to how we can investigate, how we can use science to investigate these kinds of experiences. And I think it's very exciting that we're alive at a time now, all of us here, at this pivotal, unprecedented time on this planet where we have access to information in a way we never really have before. And it's allowing us to flex our thinking in ways that is really, really exciting. So there are people like Stuart Hameroff, right, who headed the Science of Consciousness conference, which has now become another thing, but he's still involved in it. He was a hardline left brain materialist scientist for a very long time and got super excited about microtubules, as an aspect of the physical brain that would explain, he thought, consciousness. well, what Stuart's been experiencing over the last year is he's starting to have, as many people are, right, all around the world, regardless of how left brain they are, he's starting to have unusual experiences that he cannot explain, that are undeniable, that show him a pattern of contact and communication with a deceased loved one who just passed away about a year ago. So this is brand new for him, right? So here we have one of the preeminent scientists in our field, known for being purely left brain and materialist, but on a personal experiential level, his life is changing because of experiences he cannot explain. And he's starting to bring them more and more into his perspective and his approach to investigating reality through science. I think this is just incredible. And Anthony just posted something about Federico Fagin in the chat. Federico's theory of quantum idealism is actually what we're using at my organization, which is called CUSAC, the Center for the Unification of Science and Consciousness. That we feel, this theory we feel integrates an almost like panpsychist approach to all of this. So it's, again, without going on for too long, it's so exciting what is happening in science right now, in the UAP world, in the experiencer world, in the indigenous world. We're all coming together more and more, and we're seeing the intersections of how we all connect and how it all kind of weaves together into one tapestry rather than being separate. And I think that's just amazing, and I'm so here for it. I'm really happy to be here at this time.
Thank you, Sinead. That really makes me think about, you know, when you think of observers of the natural world in ancient times, historically people have used themselves as a scientific instrument, and it almost seems like we're returning to that idea in even our modern science, that actually it's all about the observer and an individual. I mean, because I study dreams and I'm really interested in dreams and I speak to a lot of people about their dreams, one thing I take umbrage with is the sort of so-called psychedelic renaissance, talking about deeply complex, multi-dimensional, visionary type of experiences only being facilitated through psychedelics. There's this kind of brief mention that it can happen naturally, but you go to any church, any normal high street church in England, in anywhere, there'll be people being genuinely having these touched by the Holy Spirit type of experiences. So there, and people have, you know, such different dreams as well. You have people that have these incredible multi-dimensional, high definition, totally immersive cinematics type dreams, and then people that just have vague wispy memories of dreams. So there's this incredible spectrum of what we can experience through our imagination and through our consciousness. So even for a scientist, it's very hard. You know, I mean, when I first got into studying dreams, because I had good dreams since I was a kid, I thought that all neuroscientists, dreaming would be the only thing they were interested in, because it was like clearly the most amazing thing that the brain did. And then I found that they didn't. So the conclusion I came to was that neuroscientists didn't have very good dreams. Now, offense Pascal has good dreams, but he's quite an unusual neuroscientist. But and he's also studying things that are about altered states of consciousness. So there is this amazing spectrum, and it's so difficult, like someone mentioned before, like unless you've had an experience with a UAP or some kind of non-human intelligence, you can't possibly explain it to someone. And it's very similar if someone comes to a lucid dream workshop, they have no experience of having a lucid dream. Me telling them what my lucid dream is not going to mean anything to them. They have to experience it directly. So I think more has to be considered, that the human body is a scientific instrument of sorts, and it perhaps is more of a cohesive science if you think about it being more a kind of toroidal field, that we are filtering the world through our bodies all the time, and there can be no single science because we're all scientists, so we're all experiencing the world differently. Of course, there are going to be some fairly hard and fast rules to the experiences that we have, but actually, I mean, you just have to look online to see that most people really don't experience the world in the same way as you. Like most people, you know, you very rarely meet someone that you feel like, wow, you experience the world in the same way that I do. And I'm often disappointed when I discover people don't see the world in the same way that I do. But we are all experiencing the world so massively differently. And I do think this speed in which we can now communicate highlights that in quite a shocking way, actually. So I think that's why conversations like this are so important, that you get so many people with so many different perspectives all talking together, and you're not just in an echo chamber repeating and reflecting what other people have said, that you have that opportunity to kind of calibrate from different points of view to try and find some kind of general, not necessarily consensus, but some kind of understanding. Because I think it can be very discombobulating to feel like you're just kind of free floating in this chaotic sea of consciousness, which the internet can often feel like.
Yeah, and actually speaking to that, I love what you just said, because it makes me think about a lot of the conversations that we're having at CUSAC. In my role, I'm responsible for building a network for us. So I've been able to be part of a lot of different conversations in many, many, many different industries with people who are very educated, thoughtful, experienced, and are working to do practical things to try to help the world, help humanity, advance us, help us develop and evolve in a positive way. And first person science, as we would call it, is definitely on the rise again. There's a lot of encouragement of the typical average person who may be having unusual experiences, for example, to collect data, and to that data can be relevant. And it doesn't mean that, because you're having a personal experience or a subjective experience of whatever is occurring, it doesn't mean that you can't include that as data. And it becomes part of a pattern. It becomes part of a database for people to draw from, right? This is why experiencers speaking about their experiences is so important. That's why having conversations like this is so important. And in terms of human experience, the body, the intelligence of the body and what occurs in the body is something that, like the human physical body and probably energy body and etheric body and other versions of how the body can be seen, are being seen more and more in tech fields as the tech itself. In other words, we are the tech. We are tech. We are the incredibly sophisticated technology. We are antenna. We are radars. We are energy fields. We're emitting ripples of energy that can be incredibly powerful all the time. And I think people who have psionic ability are a great example of that. So the fact that first person science is coming more into play again and being encouraged in scientific fields, and the rise of technology, while scary and weird and discombobulating, is also very exciting and promising in terms of human development as well. Both avenues are occurring. It's just an amazing time of so much possibility. So having these conversations is, again, so important. And I'm really grateful to the two of you for hosting.
Sinead, I think we should think about wrapping up now. So Anthony, a final comment from you?
So you said wrapping up. You're going to have to give us a final wrap. The alien wrap.
Yeah.
You're
muted, Anthony.
Don't rap muted. We need to hear you rap.
A really good rap then.
Oh, you missed it. It just came to me as a download. It's gone now. No, I just want to say a few last words for myself. And coming off of what Sinead and Amy just said, just kind of reminded me of this. And yeah, it seems to me that, I don't know if others have had this as well, but the kind of recurring theme of my personal experiences, as like the initiatory phases I've been going through that I mentioned, this recurring theme has constantly been remembrance. This like deep over, like beyond somatic or something in the body, although that is important, it's part of it. It's this like multi-dimensional and somatic sense of remembrance that I feel like not just I am being called into, but we all are. And it seems like it's kind of arising with what's happening in the world these days, and it's kind of necessary that it needs to happen. And I know Chris Bledsoe didn't get to join us today, unfortunately, but and Sarah, you mentioned religious experiences just now, and yeah, I'll say like I attended Chris's talk at Contact in the Desert, and at the end of it, the first question in his Q&A, someone asked him like who this lady figure was that he encountered in his early experiences and continues to encounter, in addition to the orbs. And his answer was like, well, she's not. I know some people like to call her Hathor or the Virgin Mary, But he's like, that's not what I call her. And he basically said from his framing, he calls her the Holy Spirit, and she's feminine. And he said it like this spirit appears in different ways to different people around the world as needed or as culturally necessary. And it's happening for a reason because of the time that we're in this world. And no matter what you think of him and his experiences, I think that's a cool message, because it does seem to track with a lot of my experiences. I know others have probably had similar things happen where, they're just being called to remember not just, capacities and potentially ancestral lineages or knowledge or wisdom that they've had access to, but something, for me in my case, that just seems like that is beyond our notion of time and space that we are tapped into, and we've lost that connection. And for whatever reason, it seems like it's necessary again. So I'll just finish with that on my part.
Is so similar to my epiphany, like biggest dream experiences as well. I had an experience when I was very small where I had a vision as I was crossing a zebra crossing, where I saw myself in the stars in space, and I knew it was where I was before I was born. I just knew it, and I've always known it. And I saw, but I didn't see, I kind of felt the presence of my two twin brothers before they were born in that space as well. And I have the experience in lucid dreams quite often where the amount of remembering I'm doing is so massive. It feels like I'm about to drown in a tsunami of remembering. And often the remembering sensation feels like it's the arousal thing that wakes you up of lucidity, because the sensation of remembering is so big. I go to Greece quite a lot, and I do this annual Oracle Dream Retreat. And I think it reminds me so much of the ancient perception of the whole cosmos, the whole world, everything within everything being oracular, because the world is always speaking to us through these various combinations. And Apollo is my chosen god. I'm a devotee of Apollo and Mnemosyne, who is the goddess of remembrance. And Apollo, as the god of the sun, as the god of light, is also the god of truth and of prophecy. And I think there is something about that remembering that is basically taking you to that point of actually feeling where you are in space and time, genuinely, not according to the confines of you being a single human being living on Earth, but actually because you've like released your framework of who you are, what your name is, all this other kind of stuff. You become that act, like was mentioned earlier, that brilliant shining spirit that is self-perpetuating. And I think the Egyptians knew what they were talking about, because they meditated and they prayed and they observed all the movements of the heavens, and they actually did form a quite clear and concise view of reality that I think we would do well to go back to. But thank you so much, Anthony, and thank you so much everyone for joining us. Let's send Dallas Campbell psychic orbs while he sleeps this evening and see what happens. I'll see if he reports any orb sightings. So thank you so much, everyone. It's been so interesting, and I'm sure we'll have more things to talk about. When I do these panels, usually this night I'll go to sleep and I'll dream, and there'll be like an idea for the next panel to come. So I hope you will join us for that as well. So thank you so much, everyone. I've recorded this and I will put this up on my YouTube channel as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Take care. Hope you see you at the next one.
Good night.
Bye.